It is a miracle that you are here with us today. You had to overcome an attempt on your life, grievous injuries inflicted by a gun, months in hospital. You have been taken from your own country that you love. Let me say the words the Taliban never wanted her to hear. Happy 16th birthday, Malala.
It is an honor for me to be speaking again after a long time. Thank you to every person who has prayed for my fast recovery and a new life. The Taliban shot me on the left side of my forehead. They shot my friends too. They thought that the bullet would silence us. But nothing changed except this. Weakness, fear, and hopelessness died. Strength, power, and courage was born.
So this is a famous moment, and about a woman who's now become a global icon, right? Yeah. On some levels, totally obvious why you would want to make a movie about her. But just talk about what beyond the obvious made this project attractive to you.
Well, when Walter Parks and Laurie McDonald, these producers from Hollywood, called me and said, "Do you want to make this documentary?" I'd only known a little bit. You know, she was a girl who was shot in her school bus. And I said, let me do some reading. And I read about her early story in Pakistan. And what I realized that there was more to it than that. That there's this puzzle, there's this mystery of this father and this daughter. How they rised out of this very small town, and what was the nature of the relationship that produced this girl who has this preternatural sense, political sense, and what is, because I have two daughters, and I want to know how did that happen? You know, and so all my movies I try to go really personal. It's like, what is the nature of that relationship? Because I didn't want to just make a political movie.
The first blush when you see this movie is, man, this guy spent a lot of time with Malala. In a lot of places. You were with her 18 months, I think, right? Basically on and off for a year and a half, all over the world. How did you get that level of access? How did that come to happen? What kind of negotiation? How much time did you have to spend persuading her that she should allow you into her life to that degree?
Well, the first day that I started this, I took a plane to Birmingham, England, took a taxi cab to her house, just me, and rang the doorbell. And here I am, like half Jewish, half Episcopalian, walking up to this family, this Muslim family, and I didn't know who I was going to meet. And that's really how you start every movie, no matter what it is, and you have to establish this rapport, this sense of trust, and the more you get that trust, the better your movie is. The beautiful thing is that they just welcomed me in, and they were very open, and it became this wonderful journey, this conversation between this man, his daughter, and me, and it's one of the great experiences of my life to get to know this family.
She is obviously, again, as I said before, she said she was an icon. She's also obviously extraordinary, right? Just the basics of this story are the story of an extraordinary person. At the same time, one of the things that's most compelling about the movie is the ways in which you illustrate her ordinariness.
Yeah.
So just, and in some ways by illustrating her ordinariness, it makes her extraordinariness all the more extraordinary, right? Yeah. So talk about that. Was that, like, in terms of motivating you, what you wanted to try to show? What was the imperative, the core of what you wanted to get at?
When I make my movies, I actually think of an audience that I'm making the movie for. Right. So when I made Inconvenient Truth, I thought about my cousins in Ohio who were Republicans. Like, I didn't want to make movies, that movie for my liberal friends in LA. I wanted to convince my Republican cousins that climate change was real. In this case, I had a very personal audience, which was my daughters. I wanted my two daughters to really understand this girl and feel like they could be as courageous and as empowered as this girl. And I think if I turned Malala into an icon, that's a dangerous thing, because then you think, well, I could never be here. I could never fly through the air and dunk the ball like Michael Jordan, and most of us can't. But I think that my daughters could be Malala, because she was just an ordinary girl. In fact, in so many ways, when you meet her, she just is an ordinary girl. She was an ordinary girl who made an extraordinary choice, which is to risk her life to fight for what she believes.
Also very much the product of an extraordinary and also very ordinary family. I want to play another clip for you, the first of two that I'm going to play, but this one illustrates one element of her family relationship. So let's play that right now.
This is my youngest brother. He's a really good boy. He has a lot of energy. He would demand us that, oh, I want to play golf and I want to... This is the laziest one. You see, look at the first impression.
1, 2, 3, start.
His name is Malala Yousafzai, and he's a okay boy.
Wait.
Did you get his two hands?
This is Malala Yousafzai. She's the naughtiest girl on the earth. 1, 2, 3, go. Come on,
It's not fair.
Come on, then. No.
This time, question.
So again, like what's totally compelling about that is it's just like the family scene you'd see in any family. You see things about her that nobody necessarily associates with Malala, the kind of sassiness that she has there. You know, her brother calling her naughty, right? All of those things are kind of striking because they play against type in some sense. What surprised you about her as a person?
Well, just that. You know, she smacks her little brother when she annoys him. I mean, when he annoys her. She's competitive. She's wickedly funny. I mean, she's funny. And also just the sense of joy and of being a family. And, you know, you think they're a family who are from 7,000 miles away. They're a religion that I don't quite understand. They're very mysterious to me. And then you sit with them and you go, their kitchen table is like my kitchen table. And that was so refreshing to be in. And they really welcome me in. Like, there's a real problem when you make documentaries now because people are so self-aware because of reality TV shows. Right. Everyone does selfies. Everyone is kind of like in control of their own narrative now because they're posting their story on Facebook. We've talked about that before. But they're not that way. They're not self-editing. They feel like telling their story is part of their mission because they were not just unknown, they were unknown in this small town in Pakistan, and telling their story was about showing the world what was happening to them. And so telling their story and being themselves is part of their mission. And it's so refreshing to be them to be open to me and honest, you know, in a world where I sometimes I bring out my cameras and people change completely, you know.
You met her at age what?
She was 15.
And she's now
2 weeks before she gave that speech that you saw.
Right, at the UN.
At the UN, and she was still recovering, and still there were still fish out of water in Birmingham, England.
Right, so 15 years old, now 17 years old.
She's 18. She turned 18 in July. Yeah.
Okay, just turned 18. A time of extraordinary change for anybody, right?
Yeah.
Adolescence, right?
Yeah.
She goes through her adolescence at a time when her life is changing in almost unimaginable ways in terms of her global profile. Did you see her, just talk about the ways in which you saw her change, if you saw her change, in the period of time that you've known her?
That's a really good question. I mean, in a lot of ways, you know, she's just gotten her physical confidence back. She was more fragile when I met her. I mean, the bullet severed this nerve that goes across her face. And they had hoped for, I think, 70% or 80% recovery, and she got 90-something% recovery. But still, you know, her face wasn't moving quite right. Her hearing wasn't quite. The bullet had smashed the small bones in her middle ear. So her recovery, she's much more physically strong now, and she's much more herself. I mean, she's adapted to this world. She has friends now in the school she went to, and so I'm very grateful that I met her in that moment where she was still trying to figure out her new life and her new world. I mean, she hadn't been, when I met her, she hadn't spoken publicly yet. Now she's given 1 million speeches and she's sold her book on a book tour and she's doing that with this movie. So, you know, she's become a more confident, independent, teenager.
But she, you know, look, most teenagers, right, if they became a global celebrity, right, it would mess with their heads, right?
Lindsay Lohan.
Right.
Malala, yes,
right.
yeah.
Right. Has becoming a global icon, celebrity, famous person, has that affected her positively, negatively in any way that you can discern? I mean, she must have affected her somehow.
Well, in the American version, it usually just screws you up.
Right.
You know, Lindsay Lohan, countless others, right? For her, you know, on her birthday, on her 18th birthday, her mother wrote her a birthday card, which is "Happy 3rd birthday," meaning she's 3 years old now.
Right.
You know, she was given a new life, and she says in this movie, it's a sacred life. And I think it's very, very moving, John, to see this, because that kind of event can make you weaker, and that kind of event can make you stronger. And it has made her this strong, resilient person who does not live in fear. You know, I live in LA, where if someone delivers your cold pressed coffee the wrong way, you can be bitter all day. And you go, oh, the worst day. Yes. You know, and like, you know, the kale salad.
I know you're speaking from experience here, because I know you well enough to know that that's you.
No, I mean, you know, I feel sorry for myself all the time. Yeah. She is not bitter. You know, and sometimes you make movies about people and the cameras come off and then you see another side of them.
Right.
She is not bitter.
Right.
She's not angry. And she, I think there's something touched by her new life, that the small things go away and the important things are important. And when you are around people like that, it affects you.
The movie's called He Named Me Malala. The he in that question is obviously her father. Yeah. I'm going to play this last third clip and take a look at that, and we'll talk about that.
Sure.
Look down.
When she was very small, many friends used to come to our home. We used to talk about politics, we used to talk about the basic rights, and she used to sit with us.
When I was young, I used to listen to him. Like, what is he saying, how he talks.
We became dependent on each other. Like one soul in two different bodies.
Who would you have been if you were just an ordinary girl from the Swat Valley?
If I was an ordinary girl in Swat Valley, I'm still an ordinary girl. But if I had an ordinary father and an ordinary mother and a family, a conservative family, then I would have 2 children now.
So the head on the shoulder, the father saying, one soul in 2 bodies, her reflection on her father there, extraordinarily mature and sophisticated kind of reflection that, again, you wouldn't get from a lot of 15, 16-year-old girls about their parents. Talk about the ways in which she is a product of her father, and then talk about ways in which she's a product of her mother.
Well, you know, my father, as you know, made great documentaries. Yeah. He was my teacher. And he always taught me as a filmmaker that the role of the filmmaker is to let the audience do half the work. You know, and a great filmmaker said that, you know, the role of the filmmaker is 2 + 2. The role of the audience is 4. And that's my oblique, pretentious way of saying that I don't want to explain the nature of this relationship.
Right.
But I think watching the movie, you get to really understand this very complex, very beautiful father-daughter relationship, which moves me. I have 2 daughters. My daughters are a complete mystery to me. They confound. My son is not a mystery. My son I can read complete. We don't always get along, but he's clear to me. My daughters are a mystery to me, and so I wanted to unpack this thing. There's something very deep and profound about these 2 people,
right? And
produce this incredible girl, and I wanted to know why. But I'm not going to tell you why. But you have to watch the movie to find out.
There's no doubt it's essential, right? It's essential to who she is.
And that's why I named the movie this, because I want to say, well, what do you mean he named me?
Right.
Who and why? And I want the audience to have to figure that out and draw their own conclusions.
Is her relationship?
And that's a gift to my father.
Is her
you know, I mean,
sweet.
You say sweet like...
No, I say sweet like sincerely with all my heart.
Like a cold-hearted journalist.
Well, maybe. Is her relationship with her mother as essential?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone asks about her mother. She's much more traditional, and in some ways is sort of not as in the foreground in the movie as her father. Absolutely isn't in the foreground. And part of it's tradition. As a Pashtun woman, being on camera is a little bit seen as a little bit immodest. But her mother, when you go into a house, you know who runs the joint. And her mother runs the joint. And Malala gets her mission and her passion from her father, but she gets her moral strength. I mean, she is really strong. And you know, Malala does. And she gets it from her mother.
An Inconvenient Truth, Waiting for Superman. It Might Get Loud, From the Sky Down, the last two of those about rock and roll. This movie, what ties all those things together for you? What's the common bond between? There's some politics there. There's also some music there. But what's the thing at the heart of it all for you?
Well, I go back to my father, who did a lot of political documentaries, but made other more poignant documentaries, and he always felt like, even when he was working for McGovern or Adlai Stevenson or Robert Kennedy, he always felt like his movies were personal. Right. And I think what I aspire to in my movies, no matter how political they are, like Inconvenient Truth, is I want my movies to be very personal, and to get at the heart of something. And I'm very proud of this one, because I think, first of all, just the relationship I have with this family is so special to me, and I hope I captured them in the way they need to be captured.
You've said something kind of interesting about your work in the past we've talked about it, the two of us, and then you've said it more recently somewhere publicly.
You're implying that we have a friendship.
It's a mere suggestion. You've said that you only make movies about people you love. There are a lot of documentarians out there who make some brilliant, some not brilliant, but a lot of movies and some brilliant movies that are indictments.
Never say anything to John Heilemann that he'll remember everything.
But they're investigative documentaries. They're takedowns. Again, I know you value those kind of documentaries, but that's not the documentaries you make. So, explain why that's important to you to only make movies about people you love, and then talk about whether you think there's any way in which that compromises the work that you do.
Well, some people would say, and there have been some reviews of this movie, that it's too soft on Malala. It's hero worship. I mean, I chose in this case not to make a very political movie. I made a story about a father and a daughter. Waiting for Superman, I take a pretty strong stance against the teachers union, and I'm a guy who believes in unions, and I'm a progressive, and that was more political. And I did get more aggressive in that movie. But at the heart of that movie are these kids who just want a great education. I told that to you about this making movies about love, not because it was a choice. It's something that I reflect upon. That's what happens. I didn't choose to make political movies. Inconvenient Truth sort of happened, and suddenly it happened, and here's a movie that gets talked about. But there's no better feeling, John, in this cynical political world than to make a movie that makes people feel something positive, that makes people feel like that it can send them in a great direction, where people can come together and participate. That sounds touchy-feely, but when it happens, it's really special. I don't think you get enough of that in this environment. Did you know you loved Al Gore before you started working on that movie, or did you come to love Al Gore by making that movie with him? That's a good question. I mean, I admire Al Gore. I think he's a hero of mine, and my job is to get to know them so much that you understand him. I don't think when I was making it, I'm saying I want to love Al Gore. I want the audience to love Al Gore, but I do think, I leave it to others to sort of go into the dirty corners of people's lives. I think there are plenty of people who do that. I think it's actually harder to make movies that are thoughtful and complex and show you people that you can admire. And it's not, you don't get enough of them. Every movie's different. I just asked you to try to tie these all up in a neat little bundle, which of course is impossible. Every movie's different that you make. Every story that I write or any story you do is different. And every story, every one of those projects presents certain kinds of unique challenges.
when you think about the Malala movie, what was the hardest thing about it? What was the thing that was the greatest obstacle you had to overcome to make the movie you wanted to make?
Well, part of it is that she and her father have baggage to their story. When you see the movie, you've heard that baggage. I mean by you've heard that she was shot on her school bus. Right. She was mission. She's on television shows and stuff. And I'm making a movie about a person people think that they know, right. And this movie is much more complex and shows you a side of them you've never seen before. The other part about it, and it's a technical movie thing, is that the story structure of the movie is nonlinear, so it intercuts the time after she was shot with the time before she was shot, and uses this pretty extensive animation, which is very, very different from anything I've ever done. So it's a very complex storytelling puzzle that for a long time I could not solve. For months, and talked to my wife Lisa, I was miserable because I felt like maybe this is the movie that I can't crack. Maybe this will never be good. Maybe I can't do this.
A lot of index cards on the whiteboard.
Well, you've been to my office in LA. There was a lot of index cards, and if you saw time lapse, they would be moving around, and you'd see a floor littered with the ones we rejected.
Right.
It was a really tough movie to make.
You talked about the fact your dad was a political filmmaker. You've made movies that are, some of which have been explicitly political, some of which this is a movie that's political-ish. Do you think of yourself as a political documentarian? Just yes or no? Do you think of yourself that way?
Yes. But atypical.
Right. In what way?
Well, you're one of the great political journalists I know. Your books are incredible, and it's great hard-nosed political journalism. I'm not a hard-nosed political journalist. That's not my tradition. I think that I sort of seek these sort of emotional and sort of psychological log jams that people have on political issues.
Right.
Log jam meaning you take inconvenient truth. And the story of climate change had been told in many different ways for a long time. In fact, some environmentalists said there's nothing new in inconvenient truth. Right. But I was trying to break through an emotional and psychological log jam that reasonable people had with that issue.
Right.
And the same with public education. How do I make that breakthrough so people can reconnect to the issue of climate change? How people can reconnect with public education in a new way, so they can sort of feel the consequences and understand those issues in a new way. So I'm an outsider. I'm sort of I'm an outlier. I'm an outsider in terms of political. I mean, Michael Moore is much more, right in the firestorm of political
and more polemical, right? Which is not really your style.
And his films are great and important.
Yeah.
But I think he's more of an editorialist,
right?
Where I'm trying to capture an emotional experience and try to root into the things that I think people get stuck and figure out why they disconnect from issues that are so important.
Like your dad, who made movies about Bobby Kennedy, for instance, you made both of the convention films for Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012, which were, inside some level, I say to you, my friend, propaganda. In the sense that they're political commercials, basically, for a president. Are you at all disappointed with President Obama, or are you, at this point, now 7 years into his term, are you as much of an admirer and supporter of his as you ever were?
I admire him, and I think it'll take some time, but I think 10 years from now we'll look back and you say that this presidency was a huge victory for him in what he accomplished. Right. I mean, I think he had a terrible Congress. He inherited a terrible political situation. I think what he did with our recovery, with health care, with gay rights, and I think what he's doing now the last couple of years is pretty extraordinary.
The Bulworth moment.
Yeah. And I admire him. I think he is who he is. And I think right now, this is the time when people want to pick at him. But when we look back, he's going to be seen as one of the great political figures of our time.
All right, let me ask you a last question and come back to Malala. Beyond an incredibly interesting story that I think everyone would agree is just a compelling tale, beyond making a compelling tale well told, what do you want audiences to walk out of this movie taking away from it? What do you want them to do? What do you want to leave them with?
Well, two things. One is I have a documentary that's being released theatrical worldwide. Will anyone go? In this competitive, right. Because I know if people go, there are millions of girls who will say, this story speaks to me. Right. And if that happens, they will step up a little bit more, they will speak out a little bit more, and the world will change just because their voices will be stronger and more clear, because that's the message of Malala. That's one thing. And that's sort of abstract and mushy, but it's actually, I know that it's profound. The other thing is just this idea of Malala's mission. She has this thing called the Malala Fund. She's an advocate for the 66 million girls who are out of school. And it's actually the one thing that we know works. I mean, climate change is confounding. American public education is confounding, two subjects that I've made movies about. But it's very clear, John, that when you educate a girl, things change. We know it works. They're not just sort of child brides. They're not just, become, when they're not educated, they become child brides. They end up doing hard labor. They end up, having their potential squashed. But when they become educated, it not only changes their life, it changes their brother, their father, their village. Economies change, societies change. It's the one thing that we know works. And so if this message gets out and Malala continues on her path, she has a real chance to do some substantial good in this world.
Davis, thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm going to now come and sit in your lap. We're done.
All right.